Hello, I'm going to try to do all, hour and a half or 2 hours of my presentation in the next 15 minutes, so I'm going to practice my auctioneer. No, not really.
An hour and a half, you're set.
Okay. First, I'd like to introduce myself to the few of you who don't actually know me. I'm a BMW tech had a shop for 30 years. I also worked at a Ferrari dealer for a while, and did those when I first started the shop. Unfortunately, I attracted the lower quality Ferrari customers and very quickly kicked them all out. Cheapskates and the like. That said, again, if you have any questions while I'm speaking, please raise your hand. I will answer them, as best I can. And with that said, I'll simply get started. Divide and conquer, strategies for directing diagnostic decision making. The point here is not so much making individual diagnostics in this presentation, but arranging your thought processes so you take the right forks in the road. All right, the rules. Now, I was going to spend more time on this, but I'm going to have to kind of blast through these. If this thing will blast. Yeah, I'm hitting it. There we go. Basic stuff, Ohm's law. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We've all gone through this a lot of times. But I'm going to revisit the thinking occasionally. All the, I equals V over R stuff. Resistance is additive in series circuits. We often forget this. Current is additive in parallel circuits. Two things we seem to forget. Matter and energy flow from high pressure to low. This is all basic stuff. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, especially since I don't have a lot of time. All right, scientific method. Scientific method consists of collecting data and using observation and experimentation and formulating and testing hypotheses. I like to use this because sometimes we forget this. I call it analytical thinking. Don't be subjective, be objective. All right, Occam's razor basically says the fewer assumptions that an explanation of a phenomena depends on, the better it is. Keep it simple, stupid. In diagnostic terms, I like this little phrase, if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras, unless you're in Kenya. All right, more rules. All right, voltage drop. I like these numbers. Some people have different numbers, but on a regular power circuit, not a sensor circuit, 0.2 on the positive side, 0.1 on the negative side, and on sensor circuits we use a lot finer tolerance, obviously, 0.075 on the positive, 0.03 on the negative. Those are pretty critical numbers. A lot of people aren't quite that sensitive. I'm a picky bastard. I like to test, this is part of the divide and conquer thing now. We're starting to get into this type of thinking. If you have a problem or you think you have a problem with voltage drop, test the entire leg, the whole circuit first. If you don't have a problem, you don't have to test pieces, do you? You only have to test the whole thing. Go to the load first, it's quicker. RTFB, Jerry has said this millions of times, I'm sure. Check the information. Don't go at it like you think you know what you're doing and then only find out later that this is one of those, and we've heard some of these examples today, one of these examples or cases where your particular case isn't built the way you thought it was. Read the instructions. Determine what is real. And by that I mean, what is your situation today, the car you have in front of you, not the ASC composite car example. First, look at the codes. We've been doing that a lot today. Look at the codes first, find common causes, record everything. John said this, everybody says this. It's a common thing. And then go on. Check the specs. Again, that's an RTFB type of item. Examine freeze frame. Figure out what are all the common avenues that this trouble is taking you down. Determine the applicable software level and updates. Now this is something in the BMW world we deal with a lot, where, and John again mentioned a little of this morning. You get a car that comes in, find out if you're up to the current software level. Sometimes it's simply a programming problem And if you brought it to the newest software level, your problem would go away. Yes, Mike?
What is CIP?
CIP is a BMW term, coding, individualization, and programming. It is all of the cars that were made since whenever the E65 car came out. I think it was about 2001 somewhere. And everything after that in the BMW world uses CIP. It's really the way cars are going. It is having the cars extremely software dependent and networked. Again, we've started kind of, we touched this today. Sometimes you end up with problems in a car that are related to programming based on software level. And all CIP cars, or other, I don't know what other makes do so much in this area, but you can have a problem in a car that they saw as a threshold level in their programming, and simply by reprogramming the car to a different threshold, they worked around it. The fault or the weakness may be in the hardware, but by coding around it, they can compensate for it and you don't have to change any components. So you have to check to see that your software is up to today's level. It comes up to current information, and John's saying, keeping your scan tools current, all of this stuff. Very important that you have your software up to date. See what comes back after you clear the codes and use that to make a plan of attack. John talks plan of attack all the time, right? Here's where John likes to use a lot of data, get in, get out fast. I'm one of these guys, I'm too anal for that. You see, I can't do that. So I like to make direct measurements. If I don't trust something, actually I say John, I meant John Anello, but John Thornton likes to make direct measurements, the exhaust analyzer, things like that. And so do I. I like to really see the real numbers. All right, if you don't get good results, make a new plan. There's a little more to that. See what's left to diagnose. If you clear up an issue that you first saw and it's fixed, but something else is still there, or something comes in that wasn't there before, now you can attack that. All right, confirm the repair. A lot of times we don't do this in the business. We find a problem, we put the part in, we send it out the door. Oops. Something else happens. All right. Here's a little strategy. If you get lost, if you're really swimming and you can't figure out what you're doing, a lot of times I like to say, I quit. I don't really quit, do I? But I turn around, I walk away from it, and I come back with a fresh head. Get a cup of coffee, do whatever. The bottom line is you restart your thinking, reboot, okay? So if you think you have tested everything and you haven't got a clue, stop. You're just beating your head against the wall. Stop, turn your brain around, do something else, whatever it takes, go have lunch, and then start again. Look at your plan. You're not getting it. It's not that you're dumb. It's not that you haven't thought of something. Maybe you haven't thought of something. Maybe it's just that you're not looking at it the right way. All right? Once you've got your new plan, follow that plan. All right? Go to your resources. Resources aren't just wiring diagrams. Resources may be people in this very room. They may be IATN. It might be books. Whatever your resources are, use your resources. Don't be afraid to network. Somebody else has probably been there. Maybe not. I'm the lucky guy. I'm often the first guy to have a problem. Lucky me. But even then, it's a good idea to bounce it off of somebody else. You say, I found A, B, C, and D. What am I missing? And somebody else may have something. Okay. When I say make your own, I don't mean make up everything. What I'm saying is sometimes you can't find a paper spec for something and you can figure it out. You can figure out what the spec is. If you have a 14 volt, I'm using a very simple example here. If you have a 14 volt system with 15 ohm injectors, what is the expected current draw? Ohm's law. And you should have just shy of an amp. If you've got 4 amps, well, you probably need a computer too. But the bottom line is you know that you're out of spec. Okay? So you kind of have an idea of what to expect. All right? Watts. You can use watts to figure things backwards. A lot of things are rated in watts, but we don't have an amp spec for that item. So, again, a simple example, a 21 watt bulb is going to use about an amp and a half in a 14 volt system. All right, since amperage is additive in a parallel circuit, you can figure out the total amp draw on the circuit by adding up the loads on every device. Again, very simple, but we often don't do it. And you'd be surprised how many times I've found circuits that are really not engineered well that way. I like the 80% rule, which is that, you know, I'm going to use a simple example. If you had a 10 amp fuse, you really should not have more than 8 amps of load on it. We wonder why our fuse panels melt, right? When you end up with 9.4 amps of load on a 10 amp. Okay, 10 amp, all right, go past that. Test, don't guess. This is actually something that was on IATN recently, and a guy's asking for help, and he really kind of blew through the diagnosis and then asked for help. Customer complaint was intermittently the instrument cluster, gauges, service engine, soon light, and so forth, things will stop working and they'll flash. Vehicle has 4 voltage related B codes. That's where I would start. But he kind of started, but he didn't really go at it using the scientific method. Here's what he did. If it'll click here. All right, he inspected the connections at the battery and under the hood. I did not see him write down that he did a voltage drop test. He just looked at stuff. Looks good to me. He tap tested the BCM, inspected the connectors. Again, he just wiggled and shook stuff. Not really a very good diagnostic strategy. He didn't see any change. He looked at the connectors on the ignition switch and actually was suspicious of it. The problem never happened in the shop, so he asked for help on IATN. What I'm trying to say here is he really didn't test anything, did he? He just kind of looked at it, shook it, you know, tapped on it a little bit, and said, oh, I can't find it. All right. First, if it was me, I would have been testing for actual voltage fluctuations. If I saw codes related to voltage, I would be putting a scope, a multi-channel scope, on each one of those control units or each one of those places that the codes flagged, and I'd be using flight record. All right? If voltage, here's a kind of a trick. John has gone through this a lot of times. If you have codes that are voltage high or open circuit type codes, you're looking at a ground problem. You have voltage. If you're looking at codes that say short circuit, it thinks it's voltage low, you're looking at a power side circuit. It's not getting power. Or it could be a real short. But if it's a real short, wouldn't you have burnt fuses? So if you don't have a burnt fuse, you don't have anything that smells funny, the odds are you simply have a problem with a bad power supply. All right? You don't really have a short. All right, voltage drop all suspected connections and circuits. All right, if a very fast event was suspected, use a scope in record mode. I said that before. Even if it's really not a fast event, that's always the best way to do it. Okay, again, basic stuff. I'm going to just throw this in. This is something Jerry used in his training a long time ago. This is a chart of exhaust gases. If you see something way off the chart, utilize that. And again, I can't really harp on this because I'm time constrained here. If you're over here and you have very high CO, very low CO2, and so forth, you're lean. Conversely, if you're over here and you have that mix of gases, you're rich. That's why I like the exhaust analyzer, because it's real time. However, this really works pre-cat without an air pump running. So if you have a system where you think you might have air from an air pump circuit, that skews these results. You have to isolate that. But again, it's one of those things where you want to know what your real numbers are. This is a matrix that was used in, I don't know, what was that, ATTP training? Yeah. in New York State, and it's kind of a nice frame of mind straightener. If you have rich and rich, if your computer response is rich and your O2 signal is rich, you have a feedback system problem, or you're looking for the wrong input, or a PCM problem, and so forth. I can't really even go through all of these because I'm running out of time.
No, you got time.
You sure?
Yeah, just
okay.
please in the right way. Stop
All right.
doing the audio.
All right. Again, if you have a rich computer response to a lean condition from the O2 sensor, which is over here, your feedback system is working properly, you have to look somewhere else. And conversely, if you have a computer response that's lean to a rich O2 sensor signal, then you have a feedback system working properly and you have to look somewhere else. And the last grid, a lean O2 sensor signal with a computer response that's lean, you have to look for a feedback system problem, look for a wrong input, or a PCM response that's bad. All right? It's just a very simple thing. Okay.
You know, Pierre, some of that, let me just interject something there. Some of that in Troubleshooter on Snap-on or Pathfinder, some of the things in there like the oxygen sensor test, if you touch the positive battery and you kind of stick your hand on the other side of the oxygen sensor and look for the response. Did your scan tool go up? And then take your hand and put it to the negative side of the battery. That's what he's talking about there. And a lot of those things are in those scan tools to really help you out.
Okay. Here was, I know BMW was not supposed to be part of this. Jerry said that there wouldn't be any BMW examples.
Lock and load.
He knew better than that. Okay. So, we have a 2003 BMW that actually kind of kicked me. That's why it's up here. And the car came in with a mill, stored codes for cylinder 3 and 5 misfires. Mode 6 confirmed that the car never missed, nothing changed while it was in the shop. Spark plugs were carbon tracked. The first time I saw this car, the carbon tracks were pretty bad, and I just said 116,000 miles and original spark plugs. Come on, how hard can this be? I put spark plug, exhaust gases were pretty normal except for slightly high HC, which I would kind of expect with misfiring with bad spark plugs. Compression and leak down were excellent. I replaced the spark plugs, cleared it, said, I'm done, go home. It was in the summertime. What's not in here is that it was in the summertime. And I later found out that this problem seemed to be temperature dependent, and it wasn't going to happen while it was 80 or 90 degrees out. But I didn't know that then. I saw something that was pretty obvious to me. I put the spark plugs in, and that was it. 4 months later, late November, December, it's not so warm out anymore. Car comes back with exactly the same codes, and cursing under my breath. This time I kept the car for a while, for a week, and I put a scope on it and really went after it, and I found out that it only happened between 45 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit. If I left the heat on in the shop at night, it wouldn't occur. If I put it outside, it would occur, but my diagnostic equipment wasn't really on it. So what I found was that if I turned the heat off in the shop at night or down real low, and I had my stuff on it, I could get it in the morning. Here was my first, when I first had the problem happening for real in the shop. And there's 6 injectors, but I only have 5 here because I was running out of channels. I had an 8-tray scope and I had some other stuff on it. But basically, what I find is this cylinder here, which is 3, is repeating with almost no pulse width over here. It was double firing the injector. It was also double firing the next one, I think. Well, you can't really see it. There's a pink one here. There's a one that's double firing as well that I wasn't really tracing on. The next screen, if I can get it to happen, kind of shows the same thing. It's the next thing in sequence, but the cylinder cut out. The cylinder stopped firing. And what I want to show you here is I thought this was a computer problem. I really did. And I condemned the computer. But guess what? It's a strategy. and it's not published, at least to my knowledge. Now, I presented this to a BMW group, and somebody in the group said, oh yeah, there's a publication about that. So I went back and looked at everything I could find. Well, he must have seen it somewhere, but I never saw it. I never found it, even looking back. All right. Bottom line is, I condemn the computer because I saw a cylinder going down, and in reality, after I put the computer in, 2 months later, now this stuff didn't happen right away. I didn't mention that, it's just really intermittent. 2 months later, it came back with the same codes. Exactly. Cylinders 3 and 5. Now, by the way, now that I've looked at it in retrospect, cylinders 3 and 5 are sequential in the firing order. 1, 5, 3, 6, 4, 2. 5 and 3. 3 was the worst cylinder, but somehow 5 got dragged along, even though it was a preceding cylinder in the firing order. It's part of the strategy. It was seeing it, okay? I asked my tech group for advice. I did not have the Bernie eMisfire tool at the time. They basically said, I've seen this a couple of times, but this was a year and a half after the initial incident. Nobody had seen it when I first saw it. Since then, a couple of them have seen it a couple of times, and it was lifters. More accurately, there was a problem with these 15,000 mile oil changes. The lifters get little striations and they cause chatter marks in the bore of the carrier. It's actually not, you have to change the lifters, but you have to change the whole carrier as well. And they're hanging on a cold start, leaving the valve slightly open. This problem, I didn't mention this in the written stuff, this problem only happens some number of seconds after a cold start. And the reason why is it took that number of seconds for the oxy sensor to start, giving a feedback to the computer, which the computer then realized was a problem. And then it started the strategy to see why it was missing, why it was getting an oxy sensor problem, I should say. And then it caused the misfire, basically. It double pulsed the injector, that didn't work, and then it dropped out the injector to save the cat. Bottom line here, what was the strategy? I think my strategy was correct, other than if I had had the Bernie tool to make a direct measurement or something like it at the very beginning, I probably would have caught this and realized it was a mechanical condition and the computer was responding. This is why I like direct measurements. When you can, measure directly, okay? All right. We've all had cars that come from a body shop and, come on. All right, comes from the body shop, it has a bunch of lights on, obviously because it was in a wreck. And they say, just turn off the lights. Right? Don't you love it? Because body shop guys usually are very good with body stuff, but they're really not very knowledgeable about systems. And as a result of that, they really don't understand what you're going to do with the car. You get multiple faults in multiple control units. Record all the faults and look for common causes. In a body shop case, my experience is one of the first things I see is battery or voltage codes. Terminal 15 codes on BMWs. What that means to me is battery went dead or something was disconnected with the key on. I don't generally place a lot of value on those until I'm sure they're real. Yes?
Why was the strategy to double fire the injector?
My guess is that it saw a problem with the lifter problem created a breathing issue with the engine. The oxy sensor saw that as a right, and it decided to double fire the injectors to see if the injector was just a little lean because of blockage in the inlet of the injector or a problem with the injector pintle, and it therefore double fired it a little bit just to see if it would squirt a little more and change the result, if the oxy sensor would respond. When the oxy sensor did not respond, it then said, we have a problem that I don't know how to deal with, and therefore I'm just going to shut off the injector and turn on a light. That's my theory.
So your theory of that was the strategy.
That was a strategy. The strategy was there to save the catalyst, but it was going to do it by first deciding whether it had a problem with the injector that it could simply widen up or change pulse width. I don't know why they didn't just widen the pulse width on the single pulse instead of double firing it.
When it turned
Paul.
off, Pierre, did it ever come back on, or did you have?
Yeah, oh, it comes back on if you the question was from Paul was, when it turned off the injector, did it ever come back on? And the answer is, as soon as I turned off the key, whether it had been running a few seconds with the miss or a long time with the miss, it would immediately run on all 6 cylinders again and never come back until it cooled off again. You could run the car for days. Also, I found, again, I don't want to spend a lot of time because I'll run out of time here, but the bottom line was, I found that if I started this car cold below 45 degrees and took it on the road and revved it up where the lifter hang-up problem was not evident because you kind of powered through it and the problem never occurred and the car warmed up, you'd never see it. Would not happen. Yes?
Did you happen to put a vacuum gauge on it at all?
It's very difficult to do on that engine. I don't think I did.
Please repeat that, Pierre.
The question was, did I put a vacuum gauge on it at all? The car has no manifold vacuum hoses that are normal manifold vacuum. There's a manifold vacuum hose that is already after a solenoid for the air pump to control the valve, and there are no other manifold vacuum hoses on the car. The only way you could get it is if you could pull out the canister purge from its little hose, which is a real knuckle buster under the manifold, and put a T in, which is almost unteeable. But no, I did not, for that reason, because I'm lazy. I'll admit it. Yes?
Sorry. Do you think just changing the oil would have helped?
Do you think changing the oil would have helped? I tried that. I tried flushing it. I tried all kinds of stuff. No. Thinner oil? No. It didn't work. The damage was done. But in theory, if it was...
More frequent before the problem?
If the oil had been changed properly before the problem and the car had maybe had better service before the problem, yes, that could have happened. Unfortunately, 116,000 miles was the first time I ever saw this car.
Hindsight is always 20/20, but would a running compression test have brought that out during the time that you were having
The question is, would a running compression test have seen this problem? I suspect that it would have, but it was a very fleeting event.
Exactly.
And I think I tried running compression once or twice, but it never occurred for me.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the burning tool might have helped. If I could have had the right temperature range, the computerized, and that doesn't mean just the burning tool. The bottom line is, if I could have recorded pressures in the cylinder under the conditions when it was occurring, I probably would have seen it. And I was supposed to test it this week, by the way, but I had software issues with my computer. Because that car, actually it was that car. I say here that the shop that replaced mine, I'll say it a little later, fixed it with lifters. I found out later they never got authorization. The car never was fixed. And it was back in this other guy's shop, and he called me, and I was going to go down and try to get a confirmation, and I had a software issue, and I never got back to it. All right. When we get body shop stuff, which this is kind of the beginning of, and I'm going to blast through a lot of these screens, we will get a lot of screens like this. We will get a lot of screens like this. This is off the AutoLogic tool, and you'll get stuff like this, and it's in your printout, so you don't have to really see that, but what you will see is a lot of screens with a lot of redundant codes. Sometimes you get something called an error in file or an unidentified fault, and that means, as John was saying, it doesn't mean that it's not a real fault. It means that AutoLogic does not have an interpretation in their scan tool that tells you what it means. It's not identified to you, but it's real. And if you log these in AutoLogic, or if you have a factory level tool, you'd already know it. But if you log them in AutoLogic and send them to AutoLogic, they will do homework usually very quickly, sometimes the same day, and come back to you with an interpretation on it. But that doesn't help you that second. Bottom line is here. You get a lot of faults, sometimes like light module, 25 faults, and the car was crashed in the front. Well, how many lights are in the front of that car? Maybe 25? Sometimes some of these were historical faults from before the accident, a tail light or a signal light out. Bottom line is, see what it has now. Log all that, but see if it's a problem that's still there. Instrument cluster, a lot of these faults will turn out to be voltage-related faults, or there will be some commonality. The bottom line is the strategy. Record what you got, clear it, or see what's common. If it's voltage and it was a car that was in a body shop where the battery could have gone dead or something could have been disconnected, I'm going to look at it again, but I'm not going to place a lot of credence in that because I want to put the forks in the road in my diagnostics. So I'm going to go look at that. I'm going to see what's there. I'm going to clear them. I'm going to see what comes back and see what's common. All right. We're going to blast through there. Here we have a common thing. Supply voltage transmission control. You will have kind of 3 codes that tell you it's voltage. This is one of them, supply voltage. Another one is terminal 15, which is ignition switched voltage. And another one which sometimes comes up is a terminal 30. That's a different story, but it's still a voltage. In this case, I cleared all the codes. I checked the battery. I did basically a charge start system test. I made sure the battery was good, the charge system was good. I did a quick check of powers and grounds on a few choice locations, and the car was good. He had run the battery down, charged it up, hadn't blown anything up, and we didn't have any voltage codes coming back. However, we did have all 4 ultrasonic sensors in the front bumper coming back. And the car was hit in the front. And they came back immediately. Doesn't that just make you think maybe something's wrong? Right? Okay, we had a bunch of actually, I probably mixed this slide up a little bit. We had a bunch of these codes. These were actually more explanations of the previous codes. And again, they weren't so important. But those sensor codes in the front were important, and the car had an outside temp sensor code, and it had a under voltage or so forth codes. The under voltage codes did not come back on this, but the outside temp sensor did. So we had front sensor codes and we had temp sensor codes, all of which are in the front bumper. I looked in the car, the sensors were there, and where do you go from there? When I tested the results, I found that every sensor voltage was pegged at a shorted range. Bottom line was, when I went into it, I found that voltage codes were gone after I looked at it, that the light codes were, obviously from the collision, what I said before, and the battery was just a dead battery. I looked for the uncommon faults, and I found those sensor codes with the parking distance control sensors and with the temperature sensors. And when I diagnosed it, what I found was they had put the wiring harness for all the sensors, temp sensor and parking distance sensors, between the outer skin and the actual bumper in the front of the car. And when they bolted it together, they squished them all together and shorted every single damn one together. It was a classic. And I wasn't going to take it apart. They're the body shop. I made them take the bumper back off and fix it. And then they came back and I cleared out the codes. But that's what it was. So again, get rid of the stuff that's common and easy and probably explainable. Make sure it's a one-shot deal. In this case, the body shop, let the battery go down. And then go after the stuff that's left and uncommon. All right. Is it mechanical or is it electrical? Car came in with secondary injection codes. Both sides, if it has 2 banks or two sets, they split them even on a 6-cylinder. In the case of a BMW, they split it as cylinders 1 through 3 and 4 through 6. Bank to 1, bank 2, okay? Separate the electrical from the mechanical by testing one first. I'm not going to say always test electrical first or always test mechanical first. I like to be lazy. Do the one that's easiest. Do the one that's quickest. Or if you have a feeling about it, you hear a funny noise or, whatever, smell a funny smell or whatever, something vibrates, go after that first. Bottom line is split, test one, decide whether it's one side or the other. In this case, using the oxy sensors to test it with a scan tool is probably the easiest thing to do. All right? Does it work? Does it work at all? If it doesn't work at all, in the case of a secondary air, but this is true of other systems, I would go right to the device and see if I got power and ground, power and trigger signal, whatever it is. In the case of a secondary air, you usually can reach the motor pretty well, at least on a BMW. So it's not too hard to go to the motor and say, do I have system voltage? Am I getting the motor turned on? Now a little caveat, a little warning here. Sometimes these motors are mounted in places where they get wet, even if the guy is not a U-boat pilot. And now if it's a U-boat deal, that's a different deal. If they went into a lot of water, you know, it's a whole different story. But if you pull off the plug on the motor, even though it's a weather pack seal, sometimes you will find green copper. Bad sign. And if it's green, you got to fix that first. You got to fix the corrosion first. But there have been some cases where it had green connections and the motor was weak, or the gulp valve, the diverter valve went bad, and exhaust gases went in there and smoked to the thing, or filled it up with hydrocarbons anyway.
Sounds
But,
like a GM problem.
well, I think everybody has that. I mean, excuse me?
Trailblazers.
Trailblazers, they had that problem? They mounted it, you know, in some cases they mounted it down low. Yeah, it's really nice, you know. Why didn't they just drop it in a puddle first?
Well, Pierre, you may want to explain how to use your scan tool with the O2 sensor there.
Okay.
Maybe just touch on that for people.
All right. Jerry said I may want to explain how to use a scan tool to use the O2 sensors to check a secondary air pump. Basically what you would do is warm it up, and you go into a service function, a direct test where you can push a button and make the air pump run and the valve open, and you're going to look at oxysensor voltage, and you're going to look for a lean condition, right? A lot of oxygen, a low oxysensor signal. And if you get a good proper response and it pegs that sensor, the pump is pumping, the valve is opening, and your passages are clear. We have some BMWs that have passages that clog up nicely. In a lot of cases, they want you to take the cylinder heads off to fix that. It's really painful. I'm sure other manufacturers have this problem too. I can't imagine that it's just BMW. But it's a very quick test with a scan tool, and that's one of those things where, being lazy, I would do that first. There is a little trap here, however. Sometimes in the shop, you can get that tool to pass, the oxysensor pegs low, but the pump is getting weak and it has an efficiency, a output problem. And it'll pass what you think is passing the test. But when it does the test on its own, it's just not moving fast enough or strong enough or low enough, long enough, whatever it is. And that's one of those cases where it's not a bad idea to go into mode 6. And I didn't really put that in here, but there's a lot of value in mode 6, and you want to look at mode 6, and especially in a tool that has a database like the Bernie tool, or BMW doesn't really do that in their own service information. They don't actually like, BMW doesn't like to use OBD2 stuff, so you're not going to get any help from their own software, but a lot of these aftermarket tools will. All right. Bottom line is, if it works, how well? You have to have a little doubt in your mind when you have something that is qualitative, you know, which is maybe borderline. You're not really sure of the answer, and unfortunately, it varies model to model, so I'm not sure I can really say it's always good or bad, but if it's bad, it's usually real bad. Those are the easy ones. All right, if it doesn't work, follow that trail. The bottom line is, if you don't hear anything from the motor, you have an easy diagnosis. You go look for power and ground. If it's got power and it's full system voltage, if it's got a good ground, the relay is closing and it's giving it a solid ground, you got yourself a bad motor. If it doesn't have a good ground, you got to follow that. It's probably a bad relay or a corroded wire. But you have to follow it. You have to break it into bite-sized pieces. I like bite-sized pieces. All right. I rushed through this pretty well, didn't I? All right, summary. Nope.
figure that out.
Yeah. Remember the basics. Always go back to the basics. If you get stumped, go back to the basics. Develop a plan. Follow it through. Go after the common faults first. If you hear hoofbeats, unless you're in Kenya, think horses, not zebras. All right. Make direct measurements. This is my own little prejudice. A lot of people like to do scan tool data or whatever, but I don't trust scan tools. How many times have we heard scan tools lie? You might get substituted values. You might get something that is the result of an indirect measurement from some other sensor or some interpretation that got fed through from another module, all of that kind of stuff. Traps. But if you're making a direct measurement, unless your equipment's screwed up, your scope is bad or your exhaust analyzer is bad or your vacuum gauge is bad, unless one of those is true, as long as your measuring equipment is accurate, you really know what you've got. You're not second guessing the equipment as well as the car, as well as the customer, as well as the, whatever else is in your life. If you don't get good results, make a new plan. Divide the problem to speed the diagnosis. If you get stuck, look back. Look at what you did. See what you got right or wrong. Quit for a little while. Or get help.
Is that mental help? Or?
You may need mental help. I certainly do. I was thinking of it. I was thinking of putting a subtitle on this originally, "The Method to My Madness." But I didn't. Okay, where to get more information? Obviously, other training sessions. Training is all good. I can't imagine any training session that any of us has ever been to that we haven't gotten something out of. Even if it's a review of what we already know, it stirs up the cobwebs or maybe it wipes away a few bad habits. I know I tend to get lazy and develop a lot of bad habits. Network with other TST techs. That goes for other places as well. Tech info publications of any sort, whether it's factory or aftermarket. Obviously, you have to make judgment calls at some point. You don't want to waste all your life looking at different things. But where you find success, you tend to go back there. Mark specific forums. In my life, that's a big thing. The BIMR Tech Forum and the BIMR Independent Forum. Now, the caveats there are, most of these are somewhat restrictive on who they let in. If you have a large percentage of your business on one brand, you're going to find that you can get into these specialized forums and you have a lot of help there. If you're not specialized or you don't do a fair amount of business in one brand, you generally can't get into the real specialized forums because they just don't want every Tom, Dick, and Harry in there. It wastes bandwidth and the people have no clue what they're dealing with. They're just, you're spending way too much time educating them. We found this in a lot of the professional forums. Unfortunately, that's true with the, I'm going to skip one. It's true with IATN to some degree in a kind of a reverse way. A lot of the people who really know what they're doing on IATN don't bother answering posts from a lot of the guys who really don't know what they're doing. And the guys who really don't know what they're doing really need the help. So it's a little bit of a self-defeating loop. The last item is obviously factory websites. You look on nastf.org and find out what the website is for each specific brand. You got to pay to get into those sites for the most part. There's some like Hyundai is still free, right?
Kia.
Oh, is it Kia?
Hyundai you pay, Kia is free.
Hyundai used to be free though, right? So it's just, yeah. So bottom line is most manufacturers you pay for. There's a lot of information on some. It's not as good on others. You got to dive in, and they change them constantly. Those are paid services. I didn't really list all of that, but Tech Info Publications is where that would fall in. Identifix is what John said. Any type, the transmission stuff, ATSG, any of those that are specific to a mark or a specific discipline or some small area of expertise, they're going to be very strong in their area. But you have to know to look there. And that's that.